So the Mission Impossible franchise is coming up on 30 years of existence. It's kind of hard to
Wow.
believe. The very first film from director Brian De Palma came out back in 1996, and that was a very pivotal project for Tom Cruise because he became an active producer for that property and his main, retained his status as a producer on the Mission Impossible franchise ever since that first film. This is also now the third film to feature director Christopher McQuarrie, but it's the ninth time overall that Tom Cruise and Christopher McQuarrie have collaborated together. They have worked on so many different projects. Actually, Chris McHugh directed the film Valkyrie, a film that I really, really enjoy. And that was kind of their first collaboration. And ever since then,
Mm.
he's taken on multiple Mission Impossible movies. He's done writing on several other projects like The Mummy or even last year's Top Gun Maverick. And so these two are very, very close to each other, and they're obviously very close collaborators in this huge action franchise that's finally returned to theaters after 5 years of being off. The last Mission Impossible movie, Fallout, came all the way back out in 2018, and ever since then, they've been developing this next chapter. But due to COVID, due to a lot of production delays and just shifting around the schedule, it's been a long road to get to the release of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. And it's also just the unwillingness for Tom Cruise as a producer to really compromise his vision in any way. So he wanted to make sure that this movie was going to come out and be seen the way that it was meant to be seen, and that was on the big screen. And so this past weekend, the movie finally dropped. We got a chance to go check it out in theaters. And so with all of that out the way, I will pass it over to you, man. What did you think about Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1?
Can you believe that we've gotten here from a TV show? Mission Impossible started as a TV show and now we are here. What? Okay, that's still the craziest thing to me when you think about that. It's actually insane. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning, man. I have to bring this up again as we did after our reaction straight out the movie theater. Is Mission Impossible the most consistent franchise we have out here today? We have been banger after banger after banger after banger here recently. It's crazy. It's very rare that in a franchise, really the first two or three are probably the worst movies in the franchise, which is crazy because they're not bad movies. Well, Mission Impossible 2, that could be argued for. It's
It
not
was
a
a
great
little
movie.
shaky. Yeah.
2 is not a great movie, but 3 picked it up. 3 picked it up. And so it's like, it's really wild to think about. You said 30 years, and now in my mind, I have to say 30 years of greatness. And Dead Reckoning Part 1, it feels like no exception to that at all, man. I have to give it to him on a consistency standpoint of what we've been getting out of this Mission Impossible franchise. And I'm really just happy to be here to say they have done it again with another crazy action-packed iteration of the Mission Impossible franchises, man. Tom Cruise is back again with his madness. Tom Cruise, the movie star. Tom Cruise, the stunt man. Tom Cruise, the producer, the most ridiculous man making movies today, is still here and still doing what he knows best. And that is getting people to come to the movie theaters for the reason that movie theaters are here. Mission Impossible is the definition of why a movie theater exists. It's bombastic action, crazy set pieces. It's Tom Cruise doing ridiculous shit out of in the sky. You just don't know what's happening, but that's the reason you go to the movies, is to see these things. And I really can't say or iterate enough how much I enjoy that it's a reason your butt is in the seat when you're seeing a Mission Impossible movie, man. I absolutely love it. So Tom Cruise, exceptional across the board once again in this movie. Ving Rhames does what he needs to do. Been here since the very first Mission Impossible as well. Just a good job. Simon Pegg, of course, right behind him, still carrying the load as the funny Benji, which we need him to be, but also just so talented, man. I love Simon Pegg a lot, man. The surprise in this film is Haley Atwell. I'm gonna start calling her Bailey Atwell because this woman is fine. She looks amazing. She looks great. Of course, she's not just eye candy though. She's a great, tremendous actress. She is charismatic on the screen. Her and Tom Cruise have a ton of chemistry on the screen in this movie as well, and it's great, man. It feels good. Nothing feels forced when they're on the screen. It really feels like she's supposed to be here. And what they do with her character in the movie, I won't give it away, is something different. It's something that you kind of don't see coming. And you're like, oh, is this what we're doing? This feels nice. I like that it's almost like a I don't I don't even know what to call it. It feels like an anime arc almost. And it's just really cool, man. I really appreciate that. Vanessa Kirby coming back tremendous. Rebecca Ferguson coming back tremendous. Just the cast in general do a good job of maintaining what they need to, I think, in this Mission Possible iteration, and they make it feel like something worth watching. And I really appreciate that. This movie, all in all, is really about the scary nature of AI. It has a lot of commentary, social commentary about the scary nature of AI, and in this case, a rogue AI, and how the military powers of the world will react if something like that actually happened, if a rogue AI actually existed in the world. And the threat is different here, right? Because in the other Mission Impossibles, it really is just like global threats where there's like nukes and things like that. You know what I'm saying? And here, there's like this presence that you don't know how it's going to act because it isn't human. You don't know how it's going to act, and there's this entity looming over the entire movie, and it definitely creates tension that I've never felt in any of the Mission Impossible franchise movies. So I really appreciate that. It's crazy to have a villain that doesn't feel tangible, right? It doesn't feel like you can touch it. It definitely feels like, okay, it's like, what the hell are we going to do? And so the stakes are kind of just as high as they've ever been, but they feel different. And I appreciate about this movie in Mission Impossible, because these movies could really just be whatever the hell you want them to be, right? They really could just be Tom Cruise jumping out of planes and doing all kind of crazy stuff. But I think they went out on a limb, and they do that for the past couple Mission Impossibles to say, let's do something different. And I think the villain choice here made it feel like something different was happening in the movie. And so I really appreciate that, man. All in all, this movie is great. I have a I think Fallout is slightly better. I think Fallout is a little bit more paced. I think my jaw was on the floor a little bit more when leaving Fallout. I think it's slightly better of a movie, but this is a tremendous action movie. This is a really good espionage. This is a really good Mission Impossible film. And it really, again, outside of the few things I just said, is it's still good. And it still doesn't mean much, again, when I say Fallout is better, because this is just that damn good as well. The only other thing I'll add, I'm really happy that I think we knew going into this that it was a part one. And I think that has been a thing recently. Like, even going into Fast X, knowing that was a part one was nice. Even Spider-Verse, knowing that's a part one. Dune, knowing that's a part one. One of those movies is not like the other. Don't get me wrong. But it is nice, I think, when you know that a part one is coming. And I think they wrap up this story really well in a bow by the end of it. You don't feel like, I know we talked in length about Spider-Verse being a part one and how that ended, and how a lot of people were upset that they didn't know it was a part one. But I think a lot of people coming out of this didn't feel like that. They didn't feel like some part of the story was complete and that things are wrapped up. So I have to give it some points for that too, because it does feel like a complete chapter happened after the movie had ended. Overall, man, this movie is exceptional. Everything is there. The technical is there. The jaw-dropping action is definitely still there. The character work they're doing here, I think, is really good and enjoyable, and I appreciate it, man. And so, wow, I can't believe there's a part two coming out. I think that's the thing that blows my mind the most. It's like there's another one of these that's happening, and if this is as big as it is, I can't imagine what part two is even about to be, because Tom Cruise is not going to sit back and not go bigger and better for the part two of anything. So I'm really excited to see what that movie is going to entail, man. So what a good movie. What a good movie.
There's very few experiences that literally leave you breathless by the end of it, but Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is one of those rare experiences where you will walk away literally trying to catch your breath, just due to the excitement, due to the adrenaline, due to the thrills and the performances, and just the harrowing action that takes place all throughout the movie. And you absolutely have to admire just the pure level of ambition that Tom Cruise and Chris McHugh have, especially as collaborators, to once again come back to the table and say on their third Mission Impossible movie together that we're going to go even bigger and even better. We're going to try to shoot for the stars every time out, do everything as practically as possible, throw back to an era of filmmaking, which is damn near dead at this point, in which we're utilizing so much real shit to bring this story to life. Every time I just sit my butt down in a theater to watch a movie like Mission Impossible unfold. You never really know what you're in store for, and that's all the better for it, because you just know that these two in particular, and of course everybody else around this film, the filmmakers and the stunt coordinators and just everybody that has their hands and their imprints all over this property, they are setting out to do something that nobody else can replicate. And that's exactly what they do once again here with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. There are very few action movies, let alone movies at all in any genre, that are made to this scale, that are made with this level of size and ambition and just the temerity to go back and say, yeah, we're going to take our time crafting this, and we're going to do everything in the realest way possible to make you feel like that the people a part of this film are actually going through these experiences. And there's a reason that it took 4 years for this to make, because when you see all these action sequences and when you see the story unfold, your jaw is just going to be on the floor, because it's like, how did they do this? How did they actually pull this off, especially in a day and age when we think about safety and just the logistical nature of things and having to film this through COVID and all of those moving pieces and components. I'm just in awe that they were able to even make this happen and bring it to life. But once again, that has to go to the credit of the filmmakers behind this to say, like, we're not going to compromise our vision for this because we know what we have in store. So I just love the audacity to make something on this level. And really, Tom Cruise, in terms of American movie stars, is kind of the only guy doing it. And that's why he is my favorite movie star. And it's important to always make that that distinguishable, sort of element between movie stars and actors, because I have a different favorite actor. But when you think about movie stars and when you think about people that do this for the entertainment level of audiences and can do it with the type of wattage and support that really nobody else in Hollywood has in this day and age, I think Tom Cruise is head and shoulders above anybody else on that list, especially considering we're riding so much momentum off of Top Gun Maverick last year, and we're just coming in with the 7th Mission Impossible movie this year. And to think that they're even approaching the levels of previous entries is kind of crazy to me. One of the other things that I really love about Dead Reckoning Part 1 is the fact that this film, more so than any of the other sequels, really feels like it's in conversation with the first Mission Impossible movie, which I really, really love. And I think just due to the nature of how the series has progressed, I think that first film has become kind of underrated, but it shouldn't be, because Brian De Palma did such an extraordinary job with that film. And all of his stylistic touches are all over that movie. And when you come into Dead Reckoning Part 1, you see them paying homage to him as a director. You see the countless amounts of Dutch angles. You can feel the tension. You can feel the real focal point of the movie really being on sort of those villains and those threats that are unseen and unheard, that can't really be tangible right in front of your face. A lot of that was in Mission Impossible Part 1. There's even a train sequence in this one, which there was also a train sequence in the first one. So they clearly are setting out to reestablish their roots and sort of return back to what brought them to the dance to begin with. And I love that, because I really love that first Mission Impossible movie. But you move beyond that, and again, you just go to just the scale and the epicness and just the nature of the film. I mean, they took this movie all over the world. They filmed in places like England and Rome and Venice and Norway and Abu Dhabi, like literally a globe-trotting adventure, as a Mission Impossible film should be. And the stakes are incredibly high, and the performances absolutely shine through pretty much from everybody involved. And I think Haley Atwell finally has arrived and has had her time to shine, because we can see what she is capable of as an actress. And she's been used well in other places. And I think a lot of people will recognize her, of course, from the MCU and her work with the Captain America movies specifically. But you haven't seen her this way. You haven't seen her do the type of work that she's done here. And this role in particular was clearly written for her. It was clearly born for her. And she absolutely knocked it out of the park. So I cannot wait for Dead Reckoning Part 2. I'm absolutely ecstatic for what that movie is ultimately going to entail, but everything that they did here really stood out to me, and certainly just proved once again why Tom Cruise is a force to be reckoned with. I would have to agree with you ultimately at the end of the day that it is a step down from Fallout, but if we're being honest about it, Fallout is a gem, and it's a pretty special example of what an action movie can be. It's literally, I think, one of the greatest action movies ever made. And I think that this could be there and it could be in that conversation, but it is slightly a step down. But that movie had so much going for it. Even the villain, you had moments where Henry Cavill is loading up his arms like machine guns, like he's doing just crazy stuff. And you don't really get a moment like that here, but that's okay. When a movie and a franchise has just become what it's become and has become this global phenomenon, and now they're just trying to top themselves, that's okay. okay. It might not necessarily reach the heights of the previous installment, but that doesn't mean that this still isn't an exceptional action movie, one for the ages, with literally some of the greatest action sequences that have ever been put to film. And so my jaw was on the floor multiple times. I can't wait to continue to watch it again and again in the future. And of course, wait for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2. But we do want to talk specifically about some of these action sequences because similar to what we did earlier this year with John Wick Chapter 4, I mean, what good would a review really be if we didn't at least try to dive into some of the details behind these massive action set pieces that take place within the movie? So this is a spoiler warning. If you've not seen Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, we won't spoil specific plot points and specific character arcs per se, but we will talk about some of the details as it relates to three key action sequences throughout the movie. Some of them have been heavily marketed and heavily publicized, but we also might start to veer into the conversation to talk about the context and how they exist within the movie. So that's just to say, if you don't want to know anything about this movie, if you haven't seen it yet, use some good judgment, pause the review right here, go check out the movie, and then revisit our conversation later because we don't want you to have the experience ruined for you in case you do want to check out the movie and listen to the rest of our review. So this is your official spoiler warning. And with that being said, I want to start off first and foremost with a sequence that takes place around the first act, which is interesting because this movie starts off in a very different way compared to the other previous entries. Like most of the Mission Impossible movies, in some form or fashion, in that opening sequence, the cold open that you would get before the opening credits, you'd see Tom Cruise, or you would at least see Tom Cruise disguised as somebody else, and then he would rip the mask off, and there it is, Tom Cruise, our movie star, a part of this film. This one takes a different approach. We actually start on a submarine, which this so felt like The Hunt for Red October, like they were paying homage to that movie. But there's a entire submarine sequence that has no Tom Cruise in it at all. It doesn't have Benji. It doesn't have Ving Rhames. Like nobody that we know is in that sequence, but it perfectly establishes what the threat is a part of this movie. And then we start to get into the more specific natures of why Ethan Hunt as a character is wrapped up into this, what the mission is that he's going to, sort of embark on in this movie that leads him down this path to come in contact with the villain of the film, which is essentially an artificial intelligence. We do get a sequence in an Arabian desert where he has to rescue Ilsa Faust, played by Rebecca Ferguson. But the first one that really starts to move the story forward in terms of the momentum of the plot and who the villain is takes place in the Abu Dhabi International Airport. There's basically a sequence here in which they're trying to find the main MacGuffin of a movie, which is a key. And there's two pieces of this key. And this key ultimately reveals what the artificial intelligence essentially controls. And so this key is super valuable. Obviously, once world leaders become very privy to what this key is capable of and what it unlocks, they're going to want it, and they're going to want to have possession of it. And then there's also, an IMF, sort of tactical force that's sent to go retrieve Ethan because he's acting as a rogue agent, which he typically does in most of these movies. But this perfectly sort of sets up, again, the conflict of the movie. It gets us back reintegrated with the main characters played by Simon Pegg and Ving Rhames. It also introduces Haley Atwell, and it really establishes Esai Morales as the main villain because this is kind of the first time we see him in the movie. So really all the forces are at play in this sequence, but there's not traditional action. Like there's not gunshots, there's not bombs or explosions. It's literally just like a chase in an airport, but it feels like an action sequence, the way that it's staged and set up. So what did you think about just the way that it played out in the film and the fact that it wasn't your traditional quote unquote action sequence, but it was more of a thriller sort of tension based sequence that was meant to bring all these characters together?
Oh man, I absolutely love this airport sequence. It is the definition of let's put all the cards on the table. That's really what they did. Pretty much everything, every power that came into play in this film was involved in this international airport sequence in some way, in some form. And it's just fun to watch. It's riveting, but it's the thriller part of spy espionage, I think, that we enjoy. And I think it was a really cool choice as well to begin the film like this, to begin the film with Tom Cruise being chased by one group of people while chasing a whole nother kind of other thing is nice because it almost is like you've been there, done that with the introductions of who Benji is, of who all these people are. Now let's just get into it. Now they're already on a mission. What is the mission? Let's figure it out. And I love how they not only do that, but they said, okay, here are old characters, but here's some new characters. They do introduce Esai Morales. They do introduce Haley Atwell's character. And they say, okay, here are the new players in the game. And so it does, again, feel like just lay all your cards on the table, but it's a big game that everyone is playing together. Here's the old people, here are the new people. And it felt really good, I think, in that way, because we're already comfortable with them, but they got us comfortable with the new people as well. And they made you question, and they made you have mystery onto what was happening with Esai Morales' character. They had you have mystery onto what the hell Haley Atwell's character had going on, what she was here for, and so on and so on and so forth. And so it just felt good, I think, to enter a film not necessarily with bombastic action that we know Mission Impossible can do, but let's set up the characters first. Let's get us comfortable, and not only comfortable, but let's get us I think even antsy for what the future of this movie might be, because you hadn't seen anything action yet. Well, you can go an hour in a movie and still feel entertained without all this crazy shit you know is going to happening. I think that's brilliant to me, because you know it's still coming and an hour's already passed. That is good. That is good pacing to me. I feel like you're doing a good thing, and that's what that's what this airport scene set up to me. All of the players, and it also set up all the tension between what these players were going to go throughout the film. So I thought it was really well done.
Yeah, this movie's really, really long. It's like 163 minutes. So it essentially has like a 30-minute cold open where you don't get the credits until after 3 or 4 sequences take place, and then you go to the airport. But it's so crazy when you watch this whole thing unfold. First and foremost, as a viewer, I don't know if people really recognize how difficult it is to set up something of this nature and of this scale to take place within an airport, and the staging that has to go behind this, and just the pure geography of the placement of all of the characters, because we as an audience have to know where everybody is. We have to know their proximity to each other. We have to know the landscape that this is taking place in, and we have to be able to legibly follow all of the looming threats, all of the different moving pieces, all of the different devices at play. And there is so much that they're deploying here, because you got Shea Wiggum and Greg Tarzan Davis coming in here chasing Ethan Hunt,
Yeah.
which, by the way, they sent so much firepower to capture one man in this airport. I mean, they arrive on jets and planes, and they got guns and pistols, and they have a team of like 30 people looking for one man. So you have that element of it. You have Ethan Hunt also chasing to try to find this key. And then in the middle of it, everything just gets thrown off of its equilibrium when we find out that they employ essentially a ticking time bomb trope within the middle of this whole sequence. And so Benji has to go to the depths of the airport to try to solve a riddle. And then you have riddles to solve. And now we're dealing with 3 or 4 different threats at the same time. And then Gabriel, the main villain of the movie, pops up, and all of a sudden he's erasing himself in real time. There's just so much like mind-blowing stuff happening, but you never lose track of what the main threat is and what's actually taking place from one scene to the next. I never felt like it wasn't legible. I never felt that it was incoherent. It all made sense to me, and the tension perfectly built, and they were able to layer it on top of each other to make you have to think about all of these different moving pieces, because what Ethan Hunt initially thought was his main priority in retrieving that key and getting on that flight all of a sudden became his second priority, because he finds out about the bomb 20 seconds before it's supposed to go off. And then the bomb doesn't go off because there's no bomb to begin with. The AI basically threw it there to fuck them up and, throw them off their game. So there was just so much happening there. But also you get the pure chemistry that exists between Haley Atwell's Grace and Tom Cruise's Ethan Hunt. That was the first time that they had crossed paths. And coming into the movie, I knew Haley Atwell was certainly going to have an important role in the movie, but I didn't realize that she was essentially going to be the second lead of the film. Like, she becomes like the dominating force of the movie, and a lot of it is really about her and just her proximity to Ethan Hunt in this movie. What did you think about that first moment when they came across each other in the airport? You can just kind of feel that electricity between those two, even though they didn't even know each other.
No, it's crazy. It's like, I don't know. It's really just good acting at the end of the day, or like not only that, but I think, chemistry, of course, is something that sometimes you can't even really practice. It's just good casting. You know what I mean? It just happens to happen. And I think that was happening between them, Haley Atwell and Tom Cruise here. Cause it's like, we know for sure y'all have never been anything else together. How does this possibly feel this way? You know what I'm saying? It really is nuts. And I think they both had practice too with similar characters to each other. Haley Atwell has had to play off of other male kind of protagonists, you know, in her career. And Tom Cruise, of course, and almost every movie has some kind of lady he has to play off of. And I think they've had so much practice. Not only that, but again, it just sometimes magic is magic. And it just happens that way. And I think they definitely benefited from that. But it was great to see because there's a lot of times you'll watch a movie like that and you say, okay, I see what's going on here. And maybe the chemistry has to build over time. It's not until the second or third act that you're like, okay, the chemistry is here now. In fact, sometimes we never get it at all. We've seen numerous times, I think, where you're like, I don't know how I feel about the chemistry. I don't know about this, but it's something about them immediately that felt so electric. And I think what also helped is the situation in the airport, what was happening as well, right? It's like this madness going on. It's the character they gave Haley Atwell as well in the movie. It's the way Tom Cruise is made to maneuver in these moments that makes it so. It's also because when you see Haley Atwell, you know this isn't a throwaway character. You know, like when I was watching it, as soon as she pops up, I'm like, oh yeah, she's here for the long haul. As soon as you see her face, you're like, oh yeah, she's not going anywhere. But you immediately become enthralled in that. You become interested in the world in which they're creating, in which, okay, how does this progress? How does she remain in this story? And so I think all of those things come into play when it came to just how electric they were on the screen.
And outside of just seeing that chemistry pretty much just exists right off the bat, you know, I think thematically to the movie, it sets up the idea. It doesn't really pay off until later, but it sets up that idea that Ethan Hunt comes in contact with a lot of women across his career, and they all end up in peril because of his duty and his willingness to sacrifice others in order to achieve his objective and his mission. And you think about the Mission Impossible franchise and just like Tom Cruise's relationships with other women, like it's been a mainstay for pretty much every movie. You go back to 2, there's Thandie Newton, 3, and then later with like Fallout and Ghost Protocol, even there's Michelle Monaghan, this movie and other movies, Rebecca Ferguson. Like there's always like that female counterpart to Tom Cruise's character. And one of those key ideas all throughout this movie is that, you know, you're not the only woman that he's ever had a thing for. Like every woman that's come in contact with his life, and this is pretty much communicated by Gabriel, they end up, you know, sort of essentially dying because of just what he has to do and just the dangerous nature of all these missions, and the fact that apparently Ethan Hunt is that guy that's willing to sacrifice those in the state of just the battle in which things are going on, which we, you know, I think we kind of know that to be true, but you do just look at all those women and you see like there have been sacrifices and there have been women that have just been lost along the way. And that probably just wouldn't have been the case if they didn't have some sort of proximity to Ethan Hunt. I even think about Kerry Russell in Mission Impossible 3. Like she dies in the first act, you know, and she just like goes in a very violent way. And it's like, oh man, that's really surprising. So when you know that he's like married to Michelle Monaghan, you think about her, like, and what that might mean for her later in the film. And all of that stuff starts to come back into play when you see Haley Atwell, because you do realize that she's going to be around. And then you also think like, oh shit, that might mean something very dangerous for her and just her ultimate outcome through this movie, or maybe even the next movie. We'll certainly have to see. But that brings us to the next big one that we're going to talk about, which take place in Rome, Italy. And it's a car chase. Essentially, Grace, played by Haley Atwell, is still on the run. Ethan Hunt is able to track her down because she still has a piece of this key that they need in order to find out whatever it is that it unlocks. But it unfolds into a car chase because we get the forces of Gabriel essentially chasing after Ethan Hunt and Grace to retrieve this key. But we also get really the emergence, I think, in a big way, of Pom Clementia's character, Paris, who is like the main heavy of the movie. She's the physical presence. She is on the hunt for Ethan and Grace, and she is damn near an unstoppable force. And so this car chase is a really, really long one. It's about I would say a good 15-minute sequence throughout the movie because it has multiple sequences. Yep. It starts off in a more traditional sense where you see Haley Atwell on the run from Ethan. She hops into a police car, terrible at fucking driving. There's also those small corners and back alleys in Rome, and so she cannot navigate her way around. Ethan gets on a motorcycle. They end up in one of the main areas of the city. They once again get intercepted by Paris, but then also by Shea Wiggum and Greg Tarzan Davis's character, who've also been hunting for Ethan Hunt. There's a shootout, and then eventually, once Ethan and Grace are able to ditch the main car that they had, they find for all the cars that you think you would find in the middle of this, they find a yellow Fiat 500, this tiny ass car that they have to all of a sudden navigate around the city of Rome through. And so it becomes a comedic sequence. It becomes still a thrilling sequence. And pretty much now the entire Rome police force is chasing after them. You still have the IMF chasing after them. You have Gabriel's henchmen chasing after them. Haley Atwell doesn't know how to drive. And then on top of that, to make sure that Grace doesn't get away, Ethan Hunt handcuffs himself to Grace, and so that he can keep her close by his side. So just like the airport sequence in Abu Dhabi, there's so many moving pieces. What did you think about the sequence, just the way that it unfolded and sort of the unpredictable nature of how it traversed Rome, but also implemented this more comedic tone?
Wow, what a fun ride of a sequence. It's just so much happening. As you just said, it is craziness and pandemonium happening here. You know, me and you, we kind of spoke after the movie about how this and Fast X have kind of these sequences that are in Rome very similarly. And what makes this, I think, so different from the one in Fast X is Fast X technically is only one thing happening. Technically, right? It's like a rolling bomb is going on versus this is actual pandemonium. Like if at the very base level, as you said, Haley Atwell can't drive and her and Ethan are just running from pretty much everybody. I can't even really put your finger on it. They're really running from everybody. At the same time, again, while being chased, while Benji's looking for, while it's just a lot happening, and I think it does make for a different dynamic. Not only that, but what I love about this sequence so much is the amount of slight campiness that they instill in all of this. It's almost like, how can we both make this entertaining, match the plot, and give kind of homage to some of the other sequences that we've seen that are just like this. We've seen so many car chases in Italy's and Rome's and Paris's and all of these other things, but they said, what can we do to spice it up? And I love that about it, because when I was watching it, low key, at first I'm like, okay, here we go again. What are we going to do? It is like the first part of the film where I have to exhale a little bit. I have to get a little frustrated because we've seen it and we just seen it in Fast X. But they said, no, we're going to make this funny too. No, Haley Atwell's not going to be able to drive. Tom Cruise is going to get her out of this random stuff. Not only that, they're going to get a new car. The new car is going to be the smallest yellow Fiat you've ever seen in your entire life. This is what the situation looks like. Not only that, action goes down. Gabriel's militia shows up while the MIF shows up. It's just a ton of stuff going on. They are forced to shoot at each other, and then he looks at Ethan and is like, dang, I can't shoot you right now because there's other bad people who's more bad. It's just I love the complicated nature of the sequence, because again, it could have been one-to-one of stuff we've seen before, but they decided to do something different, and that made it, I think, that much more enjoyable because of everything I just said. So it's like I just love their ability to not be comfortable. Does that make sense? They could have chosen it and they didn't choose it. And so I absolutely love this sequence. I think it's so different. And there's a study, I think, to be done of like all the similar sequences we've had seen, whether it is James Bond or John Wicky stuff or previous Mission Impossibles or Fast X. In what this is trying to do, it does feel like it's giving homage again to like Get Smart kind of spy stuff, or spy stuff that did kind of be a little bit more funny, but still maintain the action and the interest in what they're doing in the scene, man. So I absolutely again, I enjoyed the scene for all the new things that they were doing.
Yeah, as you said, there have been a million car chases in movies. It is one of the, I don't want to say easy because it's not easy. It's never easy to pull off something of this scale, but it is one of those things that you can sort of know if you put it in a movie, it's going to elicit some sort of reaction, especially if you do it in a real way. And so whether that is, other franchises like a James Bond or a Bourne or John Wick, or even in the very own Mission Impossible franchise, there have been tons and tons of car chases. But what takes this to a new level really is the thinking of Chris McHugh and Tom Cruise. And, Tom Cruise is beyond all the stuff that we associate with him as being an adrenaline junkie and a thrill ride and a movie star, he's also a student of history and he knows his
Mm,
film history. And he's
yeah.
often talked about one of his biggest inspirations being Buster Keaton. And that's exactly what I thought about when I saw
Ooh.
this scene, because Buster Keaton, very much a throwback to the silent film era, is known for his physical comedy, his oddball comedy, the stuff that you had to communicate on a visceral level visually without the
Mm-hmm.
accompaniment of sound. And that's what this entire sequence does, because the fact that it is a car chase, there's not a ton of dialogue that can happen. They have to communicate most of this through the visual language of what's happening on screen. So whereas it starts off as a more traditional action sequence, even then they throw you off your equilibrium, because you see Haley Atwell is terrible at driving in these Rome City streets, and she can't drive across the cobblestone, like all of these small alleyways. It's
Mm-hmm.
just causing so many problems for her. She's crashing into every single car. She's rolling over motorcycles. And then in addition to that, you're being tracked down by this ruthless henchman called Paris, played by Pom Clementieff, who I think is just like extraordinary
He
in this
was killing
movie.
it.
Killing
Yeah.
it, absolutely. She's deadly as fuck, and she's having a ton of fun because she's like unleashed now. She can go out and just wreak havoc, murder people,
Mm-hmm.
beat up people, run over shit as she sees fit. And then Ethan Hunt is also trying to make sure that Grace can't escape. And what does he do? He handcuffs himself to Grace, which also prohibits him from using both hands to drive the next cars that they have to get into. And so Ethan Hunt is literally driving with one hand cuffed and has to use his right hand only to drive a car. It is unreal. And they really filmed this. There's no cheating. They actually filmed it that way. Mind you, on top of all of that stuff, again, this is Rome, or excuse me, by this point, they're actually in no, they are in Rome at this point. They haven't made it to Venice, but they're in Rome. And so these city streets are super small. The alleyways are super small, and they're starting to get cornered in, you know. And once they arrive to that yellow Fiat, which, you know, just brings again a new level of comedy to this, and just like a new level of what the fuck, because you expect Ethan Hunt to figure out how to get out of this. You expect him to have a solution. And once you see that car, it's like, well, wait a second. How are they going to get out of this? There's no way
Mm-hmm.
they can take that yellow Fiat and go up essentially against like a government vehicle Hummer that Paris is driving. It's like an army tank damn near that she's driving. And all of a sudden the car just goes completely out of control, and they're drifting, and you're trying to make sure that they get to the right place, and you have Tom Cruise yelling at Haley Atwell like, go left, go left, go left, and she just can't get control of the car. And so again, all of that physical comedy, really with minimal language, it's just the perfect way to just change up the dynamic and to make it do something different and to subvert
Mm-hmm.
expectations of what you expect a European car chase to be, like we've seen in so many spy films, so many action films. They're like, no, this is actually going to look and feel a lot different. And they're not going to have all the answers. And there's going to be a lot of challenges in order for them to get out of this predicament, because they're dealing with the worst tools possible. Their hands are cuffed and they have a terrible car that they have to figure out how to navigate, which is just all of a sudden like a huge, big problem for them. But this is probably, I know I said something different in my immediate reaction, but I think that this is actually my favorite sequence, just because of like how
Mm-hmm.
unpredictable it is and how like different it feels compared to everything else, because you just don't expect to see this type of tone implemented in this movie. I think it makes it, you know, really maybe the funniest Mission Impossible movie that we've gotten so far, really based
Yeah.
off of the sequence alone. So
Mm-hmm.
just tremendous job across the board for them being able to execute this. That brings us to our next one, which is a huge one because it's really like two separate sequences kind of jammed into one, which we didn't necessarily know that coming into the film, but it makes a lot of sense now. But one of the things that they used to heavily market this movie was this motocross base jump that Tom Cruise was doing. And I don't know how many people know this, but that motocross base jump that they've been heavily hyping for the past year, it seems, was the very first thing that they filmed. They didn't film anything
That's
else.
crazy.
No scenes, no sit downs, no dialogue. They said, no, we're going to have Tom Cruise jump off of the side of a mountain into a base jump on the first day of production. What the fuck? That is absolutely insane, but you got to admire the fucking balls on that man to do that on the very first day. But we
Yeah.
got the behind the scenes featurettes, the videos, again, the hype packages. We saw even the preview of this in December movies that were releasing. I remember, I think it was Avatar. They attached, you know,
Yeah.
essentially this whole sequence as like an exclusive sneak peek if you went to go see that movie in IMAX. And so we saw this. But now you put it alongside the actual context of where it exists within the movie with the story and where Tom Cruise ultimately has to end up on the other side of this base jump. And it becomes something almost new entirely because you see the buildup and then you see the payoff of where he ends up. So just specifically with the motocross base jump, before we talk about the train and the Orient Express, what did you think
Mhm.
about just like that whole buildup, the fact that he essentially missed a train. And so this became like the worst possible backup plan. My guy has to jump off the side of a mountain and make sure he doesn't die on the way down because of
Mhm.
all the rocks and all the sticking out pieces of that mountain. What did you think about just that whole thing that played out?
Bro, first of all, shooting this first is nuts. What if my boy didn't make it out of this? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's no movie. Like,
Literally
this
no
is
movie at that point.
this is insane. Why would you shoot this first? That is so ridiculous. But what I really like about this is the shit. We missed the train. What are we gonna do about it all? It really is my favorite part because Benji is like trying to formulate, have come up with this plan to get him on this train, and you know it's going to be something stupid the whole time. You're like, what is going on? How is this going to work? And I love the realism of it though too, where Benji says, okay, you need to jump off this cliff right here, and Ethan is like, what? Like, I have to get away from the mountains in order for this parachute to work, in order for the aerodynamics to get me right. I cannot jump this close to the mountains. And I don't, everything about it, because the stunt itself is practical. I love that they ingested, I think, real and practical thought into the storyline itself. I think that, like, yes, of course you wouldn't jump right there. You can't. So he had to go to a higher mountain to jump off of. Not only that, what I also love about this is nature, bro. Nature. Like, there's not many other perfect mountains for them to have done this stunt. When I seen the runway, I was like, I'm pretty sure that was already there. Like, I'm pretty sure it's just the way the mountain looks. They found a nice mountain. Maybe they did a little bit of chiseling, you know what I'm saying? But I'm pretty sure they just found a really good looking mountain to where they could do this stunt and got it done. And it just looked like it was supposed to be done there. It's crazy, but it's just how nature works. It really is. And I love the attention, I think, to site location. I thought was really cool, man. And when you see him do it, it's funny because really we've seen Tom Cruise jump out of planes and fall from all kind of other shit. But it's something about this one. It's something about the different camera angles that they capture. They make you feel like this shit is stupid. Like nobody else. This is the definition of kids don't try this at home. Really, every Mission Impossible movie is kids don't try this at home. But they're like literally flipping from 5 different angles, telling you this is not supposed to be done by anybody. And I love that attention to detail as well, because it could have just been like a one shot thing, you know, but they literally give us every angle possible to let you know that this is absolutely ridiculous. And everything you just said, the lead up, the marketing to tell us that this is ridiculous, it all really helped, I think, in the context of the movie with this base jump, man. And just really, again, if this is the stunt, what's the next stunt? You know what I'm saying? Like, how is this part one? It doesn't make any sense, but I appreciate them constantly and continuously trying to one up the stunt for the next movie. It's just like I love the ambition. It really does like help me carry, I think, my love for these movies. It's like a new thing is present every time, and this base jump is no exception.
You know, they do this on the first day. If Tom Cruise dies all of a sudden, I mean, you're talking about the biggest rewrite in movie history for a movie. All of a sudden, it's not Ethan Hunt anymore. Fucking Benji is now our main IMF agent. Like, how do you even think about that and formulate that? Of course, you don't want to think about that being the outcome, but it has to be a possibility on the table that
It is all the
this might
time.
not work. You know, this is a crazy thing to do, but we have to remember going into these movies with any stunt that Tom Cruise does, whether it's this motocross jump or a halo jump or hanging off the side of a cliff in Mission Impossible 2, like whatever he's doing, there's an immense amount of preparation that goes into it. It's not him just showing up to Norway, jumping off the side of a mountain on a motocross, you know, sort of bike. He's actually preparing years and years to pull this off. You know, he talked about the fact that he did, I think, something like 13 or 14,000 motocross jumps just to prepare. He did hundreds and hundreds of base jumps just to get accustomed to the ever-changing environment and the wind and the weather, as you said, which is unpredictable always. You can never just predict that stuff. I saw a behind-the-scenes featurette where one day he went up on the side of a cliff to do a different stunt, and he saw that it was way too foggy, it was way too windy, and they called the day. They literally had no production because he
Damn.
realized and recognized, like, I can't do this safely. And if we can't do
Hmm.
it safely, then we're not doing it. And so you have to remember the element of safety and just the thin margin of error that exists for any of this stuff is just so incredibly high. So when this moment happened in the film and the entire theater of like 400 people goes silent, just trying to witness what's happening, it's really a testament to just the mad insanity behind crafting and creating something like this, because you really have
Hmm.
to just see it to believe it. Like, wow. And it just works so much better within the context of the movie. Like, yeah, we saw all the behind the scenes stuff, but when you do realize, as you said earlier, that Benji is basically sending him up this mountain progressively because there's no other option to get on that train, now it becomes a comedic moment because Benji's in the car like, can you please just pull yourself together, I'm under so much pressure. And Benji's riding shotgun to a cruise control car while Tom Cruise is like literally facing his life on the top of a mountain. He's like, you're under pressure? Give me a fucking break, you know? But of course, Ethan Hunt will always figure out a way to do the impossible. I remember Mission Impossible 2 upon rewatch. One of the characters told him, like, you know, well, this isn't mission difficult. So this should be really easy for you if it's difficult. Like, this is Mission Impossible. This is what you do. And
Hmm.
this is just the nature of all of these things that they try to pull off. And it's really incredible to see. But essentially, he does this in order to get on a moving train, the Orient Express, which is the last main action set piece in this movie. And it's a really nuanced and layered one because on top of action sequences that are happening, there's a lot of dialogue as well. There's transactions, there's moments between characters. Vanessa Kirby is here, Pom Clementieff is here, Esai Morales, Haley Atwell, like pretty much all the major players involved in this entire story end up on that train, similar to how we saw in the Abu Dhabi airport earlier. And Ethan Hunt has to figure out a way to get to this train. And once again, there's sort of a ticking time bomb situation. Like, there's only so much time that they have before they're able to actually, you know, successfully make sure that this is going to be a mission that they can achieve, because the train is heading for a bridge that's about to be blown up and collapse. And ultimately that would mean the death for everybody on the train. And so
Hmm.
Ethan is eventually able to get on the train, but that takes us to a sequence on top of the train. It's basically a fight between Gabriel and Ethan Hunt, which, again, they did that for real, which is just crazy to think about, that you had two human beings on top of a train. And then that leads to the train actually falling off the side of a cliff after the bridge explodes. And it creates this really harrowing circumstance and position for Ethan Hunt and Grace to have to escape, because they're at the front car, which goes off first. And they have to run through every single car in order to make sure that they don't fall off of a cliff and
Yep.
die, essentially. And so it just becomes this really prolonged, high tension, high stakes sequence that I didn't even know what we were getting into, but by the time it was unfolding, I was literally sitting there just like holding my breath, like, oh my God,
Hmm.
oh my God, oh my God. And it's still not over. It doesn't end. It just keeps going and going. So what did you think about that? Because it goes on for a really long time. I think
It
like maybe
does.
20-25 minutes, but it builds on top of everything that we've seen so far. And it really creates this high crescendo at the end of the movie to really end it off on a really thrilling moment.
Yeah, I love how I didn't know what was coming. I love how I feel like when the first car drops, I'm like, oh, we're good. We end of movie.
They're
We're
safe.
doing
All
we're
good.
safe. We're doing great. And then hell just keeps breaking loose over and over and over, and cars keep falling. This is the sequence. I think the more I sat on it and thought about it post movie, the more I loved it. I was just thinking, like, this is great. This is a really good moment of time to just be anxious. And that's exactly what it was. It was anxiety inducing the entire time. And I think part of it is throughout the film, you see how, in a lot of ways, how innocent I think Grace is as a character. Of course, she's a pickpocket and a thief and all these other things. Don't get me wrong, but she has never done anything of the shit that the MIF has her doing. She is on a train doing all kind of other shit, disguising herself. She is literally a fish out of water and above her pay grade. She's above what she is used to. And so I love this scene because it is like the definition of a woman who is just, she feels like, you can tell it looks like she shouldn't be there. And so it makes you go, oh my God, how the hell is Ethan going to get her out of this? Of course they got to get out together, right? But Ethan in some ways he does kind of have the plot armor, right? Ethan does kind of have like we know Ethan isn't going to die here. It's fucking Tom Cruise. He's Ethan Hunt. He can't die. But she doesn't feel like that to me. And that's what makes this feel so scary is they are climbing up this train and she is really both of them. They are the kitchen is going crazy. There's grease. Can you imagine grease being on a floor that is not even completely horizontal? It's almost completely vertical. It's at like 130, some weird angles are going on as they're trying to climb these train cars. And so I really love the high intensity, high, again, anxiety induced moments that we get at the end of this sequence, because I don't know, it just felt like something, again, that was, of course, beyond the stunt. The stunt was already crazy, but now you telling me this woman don't know what she's doing. I have a feeling if Haley Atwell had been an MIF agent, I would have been like, oh, they're fine. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, oh, they're good. They'll get out of this. I'm not too afraid. But the fact that he had to take care of her, the fact that he had to get her out of it, the fact that a piano is about to drop, and if you don't jump to me right now, we are gonna die. It happens. And so I really like all of that stuff about it, man, because it does feel like there's some stakes there. It really does. And they just pull it off so well, man. So yeah, I really like that sequence, man. It just feels it feels right. And it feels like the perfect counterpart to what we do get in the car chase scene. It feels like that. It feels like a part two to the car chase scene almost. It's like a car chase scene. She's like, well, I'm out of here. Peace. And this time it's like, okay, but this time I really do need you. And he's gonna help her anyway. You know, no matter how many times he did her, she did him wrong, he's here again, but this time for real. And so she appreciates it at the end, and it just feels like a full circle moment. It was great.
So to pull off the train stunt sequence in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, they actually had to build a train. They built a full-size train because turns out there's not really any trains on Earth available that you can just plunge off of a cliff and have explode. You know, you have to actually make something that's going to be able to sustain this type of production and actually be achievable for the stunt that they're trying to pull off. So they built this train, which is just crazy to think about, that they built a full-size, full-service train and then plunge it off of a cliff at 60 miles an hour. You would imagine that that's like the main stunt. That's the wow, oh shit moment. But it's not. It's everything you just said. It's literally the entire sequence of Ethan and Grace being at the front of the train, knowing that car by car is going to go off slowly but surely over this cliff, which is by their design. In fact, they made sure that only the first car would be the one to immediately plunge. Every car thereafter would be sort of a slow descent into the creek below. And so they have to go through each of these train cars. It's almost like a video game level sequence. I saw a lot of people. I saw a lot of people on social media saying that it felt like it was paying homage to a sequence out of Uncharted 2. I think there's a very similar sequence in that video game. I haven't played Uncharted 2, but I saw like some photos and some videos. It does look similar. I don't know if Chris McHugh and Tom Cruise were playing that game at all. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but it did feel like that there were different levels. Like you said, the kitchen, there's grease falling. Eventually, the damn gas unloads, and all of a sudden now they're faced with an explosion because the stove is heating up, and then there's falling dishes and everything is getting in their way, so they're slipping and sliding all over the car. And then the next car after that, it's like a dining room, and you have the chairs and the tables that are all of a sudden falling all over the place, and they have to dodge and duck those. And then, as you said, the last one is like really that big piano sequence, which is going to fucking just completely destroy everything behind them once it falls and detaches from the latch that it has on the floor. And so now we're dealing with just pure vertigo. Like, we're looking directly down to our potential death, and right above us is a fucking Steinway and Sons piano, which will crush you to smithereens if it falls on top of you. And so there were just so many levels to this and so much tension, and man, it really makes you just grab the edge of your seat like, oh my God, somebody can really die here. And as you said, Grace's character in particular feels like the one that might go, because they had also set up her death a lot in this movie. Like, oh, this might just be another woman who Ethan Hunt comes into contact with, who's going to lose her life because of the dangerous nature of the mission. By the end of it, that does not happen. You know, spoiler alert for those specific end details. She will return in the next one, but it certainly gets you believing that she's going to meet her doom in this particular sequence, just because of how harrowing it absolutely is. But it was an excellent way, I think, to end this movie and to give it all the momentum that it needed to set us up for Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2. So, folks, that will do it for our review and spoiler-filled section of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. If you've checked out this movie, if you have any thoughts about the sequences and just what lies ahead with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 2, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.